Yeah, I just wanted to update you guys. There's this big audit analytics symposium that's going on right now here. Part of what anybody know Professor Miklos Vassarelli? He's not that visible in the undergrad anymore. He teaches more in like PhD, MBA. But he's a guy who really in the 80s, he came here and he invented this thing called continuous audit, where his whole thing, he was like a math science guy, computer science guy. And he said that basically audits should be done on a continuous basis as they're ongoing, not retrospectively. And we should use computers to do that. So he said this 30 years ago. He wrote a bunch of papers about it. And then what happened was in the last 30 years, especially now, everybody in the industry implemented this. Every corporate firm and every public firm and everybody. And he was one of the first people to do this. So he became super famous, and he basically travels the world with all these different projects, and all over the world people have implemented his databases and his software. So anyway, so what they're having now is all day today and all day tomorrow and Saturday is people from all over the place meeting regarding this continuous audit symposium. I was just upstairs there. They had a advisory meeting. This is part of the car lab research stuff that people do upstairs. I'm involved with it in a small capacity. I was just filming these little movies for YouTube that he does. So, and one interesting thing that came about is a lot of these people, there are a lot of sort of Big Four partners there, and directors from Siemens, Hewlett-Packard, directors in accounting departments. And the big thing that they talked about was that basically how there's a lack of automation in audit, and that's creating a lot of pressure on costs in auditing, because they were saying the private people were saying, and I was just talking about this on Tuesday about how Big Four companies basically create all this work for the internal companies, and then they charge them more for it. And the corporate companies, which I've seen before, that what they're talking about, they're saying you're driving me insane with all this extra work and all this extra money. Get away, I'm livid. And I've been there on the receiving side of that. And in a way, they're saying there should be more continuous audit. The answer is there should be more, instead of sitting there and ticking and tying by hand using 20 people, we should have computers doing some of this work. And a lot of people are doing that. A lot more people are doing that. So the idea was basically to get more regulators on board with that. And some of the, these high-level corporate people were saying how they're starting to mix in a lot more computer scientists and mathematicians in their audit departments rather than just accounting. And they were saying it's scaling more from 70% accounting to 40% accounting and 60% computer science, math, statistics, because there's these huge data sets that people are working with. And in a way, as an auditor, the KPMG, I think one of the head partners was saying how as an auditor, you see all of that. Whether you get involved with it so much or not, you definitely see it. And it's the degree of your background is sometimes I've seen people be no, get me out of here. I don't want to get involved with all of this. And some people are I'm good with Excel. I like numbers. Let's see what happens. Then you get curious about that. But it's basically the state of the accounting situation right now and how automated it's becoming. So that's an update on the state of the audit profession. And what else? I wanted to share with you guys about 2 case studies that are going on. I forgot to share with you last time. There's the Johnson & Johnson case study that's going on, and Joe Market is running these. And what he told me was, I was talking to him about it, he said that whoever wins this case study automatically gets an internship with J&J. So it's in a way, for some people who I speak to who are sort of in that category where it's I don't know, high GPA, maybe not. In a way, I think it's another avenue for you guys. You could just win one case study and then you're done with worrying about all the other stuff. So in a way, if you want, let me know if you're interested in that. And then the Moody's one, I thought that if you're interested, also let me know and send him Joe Market, or if you send me your resume or send him your resume, he'll put you in a team. You don't have to be in a team. Like the other one I talked a lot about in the summer. So many people wanted to do it. Like, remember Abraham, you guys wanted to do it, but you couldn't find the team of like Sandra. But in a way, this one you don't need a team. You can just send him your resume and he puts you in the team, which I think is way easier, because at the end of the day, the team thing became so complicated for you guys. And that one for Moody's, if you end up doing, and you know me in a way, or even if like you don't come to office hours, just email me, because I have a lot of fixed income background. I used to work so much in fixed income that I could help you get to like a really nice level with that, because I used to work in creating bonds. So with Moody's, for Moody's in a way, like all the models we created were for Moody's. And Moody's, I really know their language and what they look for, like on a really deep level. So if it's something you're interested in, I'd love to work with you in a way, like in a behind the scenes, obviously, but help you get to that level where you could really perform on a high level in this case study and maybe win it. Wouldn't that be awesome to win a case study? It'd be awesome. All right, so I can help. So anyway, let me know. So the plan of what we're going to do today, we have handouts. If you haven't received a handout yet, I'm just going to leave them here, and you can just pick one up at your convenience. So what we're going to do today is, in a way, we're one class ahead of my other night section. So I wanted to catch up by doing something a little bit different today. So what we're going to do is, for about 20 minutes, I'm just going to introduce the governmental accounting topic. I'm just going to very briefly introduce it. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to get really involved with governmental and nonprofit. So that's going to be something we'll do in the next 2 weeks. But today I'm just going to briefly introduce it, just to sort of give you the files and the right things to look at before next class, before next week, to be really prepared. And primarily what we're going to do today is technically an Excel type workshop. Just like more in terms of like learning like a skill set that would be helpful for you in a way in accounting, in the accounting field. We're going to work on, in a group, to go through the homework. What I handed out to you just now is the homework that's due Tuesday night. So, and this is all partnership homework. It's the Tuesday night homework. And what I want you to do is, I prepared a spreadsheet that you can download from here that kind of solves a big portion of it, right? And what I wanted you guys to do in the workshop is just, first of all, understand what I'm doing in this model. It's a pretty sort of sophisticated set of things that I'm doing there. And then in the homework, in a way, we just did this. It was really successful, actually, in the last section. What people started doing is they sort of rebuild the model themselves, and then there's questions in the homework that are totally different, and they already knew how to solve them using Excel. And that's what I want you guys to do, is in a way, shift to using Excel to solving some of these problems. And I wish I was doing that back in September with the combination, because in a way, with Excel, things become much easier. And it's much harder at first, I definitely agree. The first initial phase of learning Excel is so painful. It's for sure. But there's an incredible return after you're comfortable, because if you understand it, it's really easy to deploy it for new problems and new things. Because you're like, oh, I already know how to do this. I can do this really quick. And you can also be 100% right that you're right in Excel. As opposed to on paper, you're always going to be nervous. You're never really going to know if you have the right number. And that's why in public accounting, in a way, you never do anything on paper, because the whole point is to know that you have no errors. So in public accounting, all the Excel spreadsheets have checks on them. They always built-in checks, which means like, oh, you did all the work. Now we're going to build a little bit of testing into the work to make sure that whatever you're doing is actually reconciles. And every work paper has a reconciliation. And that way you always know if you're off and by how much you're off. As opposed to in paper, you really don't know if you're off, yet alone by how much you're off, because there's no additional, Anyway, so we'll look through, that's kind of part of the sort of level of using Excel in an accounting way creates a much easier way to do accounting. You can do much more. So we'll do that. we'll do that in about 20, 30 minutes. And in a way, it's also like we'll have a lot of time for that. In a way, I also want to give you guys time to just get through the homework in your team. Just to finish this, you don't have to do it over the weekend. We could use the time now. That's really the point. I noticed some people in the last class were doing that, and then some people weren't until the last 5 minutes. They realized they could use this time, and then the class was over. So it's like just to give you guys time. So governmental accounting. So this piece actually, in a way, I believe it's 20%. No, I think it's 10 or 20% of the financial accounting and reporting exam, the governmental and nonprofit. So in a way, compared to other sections of the CPA exam, this is sort of like a really big piece compared to how much we cover it. Because it's like 10% of the whole thing. I mean, that's like, for me, I remember when I was studying, that was the one section that I was really like concerned about, because I didn't really know it that much at all. So I was like, this is the one I need to keep an eye on, because that's 10%. Like, and I know nothing about it. You know, I don't know how that ended up being that way, but it's basically the piece that I ended up studying a lot, because I was like, oh, well, it doesn't seem that complicated. Actually, it's not complicated, but it's just something that for some reason we don't spend a lot of time on. In the Macy program, there's a whole class on it called Governmental Accounting. So I highly recommend that to you guys who are studying. Also, we'll take with Professor Irfan Bora, who's like a really incredible professor for governmental, Mr. Bora. So just to start with governmental accounting. So governmental accounting is basically governed by this institution called the GASB. And it basically does what the FASB does, but on the governmental side. So there's a lot different. It's very precise in its purpose of really identifying the use of funds. Not so much focusing on profit and loss, which is what business does. It's more identifying like the accountability of how things are being used. You know, and the way we're going to study governmental accounting is a sort of a specific way that we study it, is we're going to look through 2 case studies. One is going to be in the Newark public school system, and basically we're going to take the Newark public school system report and really like assemble it and disassemble it several times, because I want to really work with real things. Because with governmental, it's really easy to get lost in all the terms that they're talking about, because there's a ton of like language that they're talking about. But I think that you guys are sort of not that well versed in GAAP yet, that if I give you a whole other set of books, that it will make so much sense to you. So I think it's better to actually look at it and decipher step by step, how is it different than GAAP? And then go back to the definitions and look at the definitions again, like to actually like, no, okay, I know what it means now, so I can really relate. So I'm going to bring up that in a minute. And then for nonprofit organizations, I picked Rutgers. And you'll see, like the Rutgers report we'll work in November with. We'll also like really see what the reporting looks like. And actually a really nice report, really nice, clean, super clean report. So what I wanted to do now, this is sort of, I'm building out this piece yet in e-college, if you guys are in here. But I want you guys to do now, go into e-college, go into the governmental lesson, and download the Newark Public School System report. It's just a link right here. It's just a link. And what it is right now, I'm just going to go through it. I'm just going to go through their financial statement and like, you know, explain to you guys how it works. So basically, there are 2 sets of financial statements for any governmental entities. There is the government-wide financial statements, and then there is the basic fund financial statements. So they operate on a two financial statement basis, two different sets of books. The government-wide financial statement, what is that? That's basically when you look at the whole entity all together. So this is, the entity's name is Newark Public Schools. So this entity runs the public schools in this city. It's in charge of all of that. And it's a governmental organization, right? And the statement of net assets, in a way, it resembles a balance sheet. It resembles a balance sheet because we are talking about assets and liabilities. So to me, like, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. It's basically a balance sheet. And what's interesting here is, like, you want to know, from looking at this, what is the state of this entity, right? What's a balance sheet for? What's a balance sheet for? You want to see if the entity has positive equity, if it has liquid assets, right? To see if it's a sustainable operation. Like, hey, listen, do these guys have more assets than liabilities? Do they have any liquidity? Or, like, are they able to pay bills? Like, if I said a big bill is coming, are they able to pay it? That's basically what we see here, you know? So they have assets of 913 million and liabilities of 194 million, right? So they have net assets of about 718 million. So that looks like a pretty healthy organization to me so far. So far, so good. And looks like their net assets are primarily invested in capital assets. So basically, you could see that primarily the balance sheet comes from having capital assets. You could see that basically 7 out of 9, about 75% or more, 80% of the assets are tied up in capital assets. And I'm sure you're very curious about that. What do you think it is? What's going on here? Why is 80% of the stuff, and what kind of capital assets do they have? Buildings, right? It's schools. They have schools. So it's mostly, like, I don't know how many schools they have here, like maybe 30 schools. I have no clue. But maybe it's like 30 buildings. 30 buildings, pretty expensive, right? 20 million a building or something like that, right? So 20 times 30, like 600 million makes sense, right? Could be. Could be. Maybe not. But it sounds like a story I could sell to somebody. No, but this idea, you're looking at these things, you want to just be curious about, is this, in a way, like, I think, like, when people review financial statements, a lot of times I remember, like, people would, like, try to interpret it right away and be like, does it even make sense? Because sometimes, like, the number is off and it just doesn't make sense, like, right away. Like, say this was 60 million, that wouldn't make sense because they have way more, like, there should be more schools than that, than just 60. So you just want to look and make sure, like, sometimes these things just they could be completely wrong. And then the other thing that's really, anything else you notice here that's very much not like GAAP? There's another thing here that looks very much different than what we usually see in GAAP. This whole restriction thing. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. But you see how they have here restricted for? In a way, in governmental stuff, only in governmental as opposed to corporate, you see that they'll have equity and then they'll classify that equity as restricted for something, right? And it's because they're not allowing certain parts of the cash to move in certain ways. Why is that? It's due to budgetary legislation. For example, I'm sure you heard of this a little bit. Like, you know, an example, Mark Zuckerberg gives $100 million to Newark Public Schools. And he can say, you know what? I only want that to be spent on technology in the classroom. And that's what he said. He made it up. And now, the agreement he signs with them, a legal agreement that that's what they're going to do. So the money comes, the cash comes in, and of course they want to, like, say they want to buy a building, and then basically they can't. In a way, that's where this whole restriction comes in from, and capital or other purposes. And that's basically how the statement of activities is the other major statement. So we had the statement of net, you know, we're talking about, just to backtrack a little bit, we're talking about we're talking about governmental-wide statements, right? Governmental-wide statements. And we have two major statements here. One is the statement of net assets, and the other one is the statement of activities. So if the first one was the balance sheet, this one is like income statement. Income statement. Well, I would say more so because I do see net assets here of 718 million. These are great ways of figuring out what's going on. In a way, I was actually very curious about this in the summer as well. And but we do have positive equity here, no? It was 718 million of positive equity. But this is really, the idea is that if I asked you, what are you doing with the 718 in equity? Where is it? That's what this breakdown is for. And they're saying, you know what, 767 is in capital assets, and the rest is cash restricted for other things. Unrestricted is basically, that would be the remaining piece, right? Basically, what this means to me, and I remember what this means to me is that they're showing me more equity in assets than we have. More equity in assets than we have, right? So if you were, from an audit perspective, and you're very curious about this, where would you really want to look further to see, man, is this a lot? I'm really thinking there's an error in these financials right now. Very curious about that. Which account would you check? This is really if you get this, very smart in a way, which account do you want to check? Because we're looking at a difference between what the capital assets are and what they're stated to be. And we're getting a difference. Depreciation, exactly. So to me, the first thing I would do is I would look at the depreciation footnote and figure out if they're addressing this deficit by telling me that there was basically some kind of method change in depreciation that resulted in a skew of the depreciation computation and changed the capital asset balance to something that is less, than it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? And to me, it looks like the depreciation doesn't match. The investment account and depreciation are not netting out to reality here. So now we're looking at the statement of activities, and we said this is kind of like the income statement. So before, you were able to see kind of what is the school system doing with its money? Where is it allocated? And we pretty much, what did you get a feel for? Pretty much they have schools, no? That was the point. They have a bunch of schools. I didn't really see that much going on there. It looked like they just owned some buildings. Makes sense? Pretty simple. Now the next thing we're going to do is figure out how are they using their money on an annual basis? What are they doing with the cash flow that they are getting? So this is the statement of activities, and we're saying these are the expenses. So we're spending about 1.1 billion a year. And then this is basically how you're spending it. We have instruction, social work, health services, improvement of instruction, educational media, instructional staff training, student transportation, special school, charter school. And then we have a food service and regional day school. And then we have about 1.1 million of total expenses. And then revenues are coming in at property taxes at 106 million, federal sources 25 million, state sources 772 million, miscellaneous income of 7.8, and then a total income coming in at 912 million. So basically, we have expenses of 914 on a net basis, expenses of 914 and income of 912. It looks like they're pretty good at matching up their revenue and expenses. Coincidence? Not really, right? Because what do? They budget out how much they're going to get and they spend it, right? It's a different methodology in nonprofits and governments than it is in business, right? It's a budgetary process. So you know how much you got last year, so you make the budget to spend that much this year. So they knew how much they were going to get. They knew they were going to get the 912, so they spent the 912 in advance. You know what I mean? That's how these entities operate. They basically fill in costs, as opposed to businesses sort of operate in a much more nimble way where they're like aggressively going after profit while trying to cut costs. In a way, this is a totally different system. They basically have a budget and they fill it. Budget, fill it. It's a very different type of environment. You know, culturally also, for sure. And in a way, I want you guys, like when you download this file, try to work through each item of what's happening here. Because when we get into the study more directly, you know, you'll be able to understand what are the terms that they're using, like, and how is this different than GAAP. So that was government-wide financial statements. Any other questions on that one? Pretty good. So basic fund financial statements is now this is where it starts getting very different. It starts getting very different and can be a little bit more confusing. And this is where we'll just take a preview of it, and next time we'll really get into the study and we'll go get an outline and we'll go through the lecture on this to figure out what's going on. But this is basically where you do your accounting by each fund. And each fund represents a specific project. So this is now, you know, what I like about this is that it's fund accounting. And I love fund accounting because I used to do it all the time. Like, oh, fund accounting, I get it. Yeah, it's a fund and it's closed and it's really nice because nothing, you know, it's organized. But what I don't get about this is how does this reconcile to the totals? I'm like, how do you know that all the funds add up to something? And I think they don't. It's like each one is on its own. Each fund is really on its own. And then my question has always been like, how do I know that this fund fits into the bigger picture? And it's like, in a way, that's not how it's built. It's really very unique to government because they have to keep track of like specific things. Like what's a special revenue fund, for example? It could be the entire operation for the school cafeterias because they're charging for food, right? So think about it. It's kind of like a little business that they're running in there. It's like they're sort of doing this little business work, and they want to see at the end of the year, how are these cafeteria people end up doing? Like what's going on there? They're buying a bunch of stuff, they're selling a bunch of stuff, totally unrelated to our buildings, totally unrelated to anything actually. So we want to make sure that we capture all of that. And that's how you have entities within entities within entities inside the government. And each entity has its own purpose and its own books. And that's basically what the fund financial statements are all about. And then we have statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances, sort of how we go through this whole thing. Governmental funds. This is in a way what I'm talking about, like how they all come together. But we'll look more into that next time. I just wanted to introduce this, like after we look into the definitions. And then I wanted to show you guys, you know, as you become more and more curious about these financial statements, you know, when your curiosity peaks, you should look at the notes to the financial statements. This is where all the information is about not the business, but the entity. Like in a way, if you want to know more information about the entity, you want to read the footnotes to the financial statements. And you'll find out exactly what's going on. And these, for how big the report is, are actually very, very simple. Very readable, very simple to get through. So this is where discuss the details. Okay? So this is what we'll be working with in the next couple weeks. And then I'll do more of the lecture study on Tuesday, where we start going through the PowerPoint, we'll start going through the slides together. For now, what I want to switch gears here a little bit for now, and I want to jump into this here. If you open up your eCollege, and then slide down to the bottom of the partnership section. There is a spreadsheet here that I want you guys to click onto. Let's see if I already have it. I already have it. So this spreadsheet here that I have kind of solves out questions 11 through 25 in the homework, whatever the homework file is, or like, you know, you don't have all these questions here, but there's about like 15 questions that the homework had. And not the homework, the whole file. I only gave you guys like 15 questions or so in the whole homework, but basically this maps out the answers to that first case study where it talks about Cleary, Wasser, and Nolan. And it maps out how to solve it. So I wanted you guys to initially just learn how this spreadsheet works and then perform this exercise. There's a practice exercise here on how to work with it. And the idea is, the whole point is like, as you go through this little thing here in your group, I want you guys to work in a group. In a way, this is part of our class work of working together. So I do want you guys, if you're sitting somewhere like on the corner, like please join with your group to sort of work together, to contribute. This is a really big part of the class, means a lot to me. And work through this, and you'll see, if you're able to do this, then you get to the homework, like question 26. Some of those questions that appear very long and complicated, what I noticed that students in the prior section were able to just jump in there and do them right away. And do them in a much, much cleaner and stable way than doing it on paper. Like doing it in a way where it's like you know 100% that you're right, and 100% that if you ever had to do it again, you would be right with no issues. Not in a strenuous way where you're not sure. So I want you guys to work in this way. Partly it's because in the business world, you basically deliver a spreadsheet that's like fully works and fully reviewable. You know, and that's sort of a whole other skill actually of how to deploy these concepts in a way that's quite sophisticated, reviewable, and very scalable. And that's like a whole other skill set that I want to study with you today. So please guys, open that up and get together with your group, and I'm going to come up to each group. I'm going to work with you guys individually on these problems and this whole exercise. Okay? Oh, and also this is the time to get through this homework as well. Like, in a way, like, so you guys, you know, have extra time this weekend or whenever. You can sort of get through all of this now in your group. And everybody saves their Excel file or Word file, whatever it is that you have, and you can submit whatever you come up with from the group.